when they see me, they know that every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther. You know, every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. You know what I'm saying? Every time I speak, I want to shiver. You know, I don't want them to be like, they know what I'm going to say because it's polite. They know what I'm going to say. And even if I get in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Ain't that what we're supposed to do? I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that's our job, is to spark somebody else watching us. We might not be the ones, but let's not be selfish, and because we're not going to change the world, let's not talk about how we should change it. I don't know how to change it, but I know if I keep talking about how dirty it is out here, somebody's going to clean it up.
And now he's been promoted. His job, principal.
Hello. This is Uche Njoku. Welcome to the Sneaker Principal Podcast. It is day 3 in a row of me actually recording, going live for the podcast, which is highly unusual. I don't think I've ever done 3 days in a row. But I'm letting the spirit move me as I am on midwinter recess. So I do have a little bit of time, so I can actually record in daylight and not always at nighttime. So if you're here right now and you're joining me, thank you so much. Welcome. It is a privilege and honor to have you be present in this space with me. Just want to make sure that that everything is clicking and working. And let me see right here. You know, one of the things I talk about, at least I've talked about in past content that I've created about when you're recording anything, you're going live on anything, always have a way to monitor what you're doing. So, if at minimum, if something is going wrong on the other end, that you can see it as well. So I have my trusted iPad here. I'm looking on the screen. I can see myself talking, so I know I am live on iPad, on YouTube. That's what I use to monitor. But I'm also streaming to Facebook. I'm streaming to Twitter. I'm streaming to Twitch and LinkedIn as well. And those of you on TikTok who are watching me right now, thank you. I'm streaming to different spaces here. Again, this is me taking advantage of technology and the things that you can do with technology at this point in time. All right, enough about that. So again, welcome. This is going to be a very short episode. I just watched another documentary. I know last time I talked about the film and documentary that I watched over the weekend and the day before yesterday, I believe, which was Inventing Anna, and also the Tinder Swindler. So the next thing I've been watching here has been Subnormal, which is a documentary. This documentary here, I'm right now on IMDb.com. It says the UK school scandal through the eyes of Black parents, teachers, and activists who banded together to expose the injustice and force the education system to change. So this film takes place at least the story, takes place in the 60s and 70s when there was an influx of Caribbean families moving to London, into the United Kingdom. And what they did during that time frame as far as using IQ tests to determine that children were educationally subnormal. So by doing that, they moved these children into the specialized schools. I think they were called, let me see if I can find it here, ESN schools. I'm trying to see what does the acronym ESN stand for. I don't recall from the documentary. I'm looking at an article right now. I don't see it, but here in New York City, I think it would be likened to like a District 75 school or a school that entirely encompasses serving special needs students. And they were doing this, and the numbers of Black children who were being sent to these schools were far and above white children. And again, we're talking about a space where a lot of the families, because they were immigrants new to the country, were really relying on schools and the professionals in schools, principals, psychologists, to really be able to support their children's learning. So if they said, hey, your child needs additional help in this other space, parents said, okay, they signed up on it. And not only were they signing up on it, they had no rights in that space to truly fight back as individuals, because at the end of the day, the school system said this is what we're going to do, and you kind of have to follow lock and step. and not so different from what happens even today here in America. And what was interesting is the fact that they got to speak to those children now as adults. Members of the cast were not cast, but subjects of the documentary were some of the people who were children at the time. I gotta give a big shout out to the director and I think the creator of this film, LaTonya Shannon. An amazing piece of documentary work. And when I say it's one of those films, like when you're sitting here watching it, you can't help but have moments of just pure anger and rage, because you're like, why is this okay? Why is it okay that children are being treated like this? But I think the thing for me that really had me thinking, especially being an educator and being a school leader and having devoted 16 years of my life in New York City, and then spurts in different spaces in Nevada and in California as an educator, is the fact that how the story from the 60s and 70s wasn't that different from my experience when I first came to America. And this would have been 83. And 83, I was told, at least my mother was told, that I was retarded, and I guess during that time frame, that was the appropriate word to use to, I guess, identify me as subnormal or educationally uneducable. And I remember my mother crying and feeling like she had no choice but to follow along with their recommendations. And I was thrown into special education, and I was being given special education services. But in all reality, it was a subpar education I was receiving. Even at the time, this was second or third grade. I knew this was subpar. It was ridiculous. But my mother had the foresight and the limited resources to take me back to Nigeria, where there I got the education I deserved, and I've thrived since then. Having gone to college, have 2 master's degrees, and I am in education. I am a school leader. But what's interesting is the fact that I went through that same experience. So a lot of the adults who are interviewed for this documentary who are in the United Kingdom, or formerly United Kingdom, went through the exact same things that I went through. The only difference was that I wasn't sent to a specialized school. I was sent to the basement. And that's the what you call it. I'm trying to find the right word to describe it. In air quotation marks, the basement, that place that you hide the kids who are undesirable. So I was in the special ed classroom, and it's so interesting, the reasoning behind it. One of the things from this documentary I thought was very important is how language was a huge defining factor. Vocabulary and language, a huge deciding factor, it seemed to me, on measuring the intelligence of children, and the cultural biases that existed that allowed for these psychologists and these educators to be able to easily say, this child is this child is subpar, this child is subnormal, because of their inabilities to align themselves with what our expectations are. So an example that I give to you is with language. They believed that Black children, Caribbean children, were of poor intelligence because of their inability to master the Queen's English. Because most of these islands like Jamaica and like Trinidad, some of these countries were formerly British colonies, or were maybe even colonies at still at that point in time. So they had already been under the influence of British culture and British education. So their patois, their broken English, was used as a way to say, see, this shows low intelligence, not understanding that patois and the hybridization of language, English into other local dialects and ways of speaking, were really the formation of hybrid languages. I mean, let's be honest here. How do you not expect for there to be a hybrid language when most of the people on these islands and these places were forced together from different places in Africa and all different places across the Caribbean, and then they developed their own language. They developed their own language. Yes, the foundation of that language might have been English, but the language nonetheless was a valid language. But however, these children, as they came here, their broken English, their patois was treated as though it was a mark of their inability to master Queen's standard English. And it blew my mind, but then also gave me an amazing aha moment, because there's been this ongoing argument that from time to time pops up about the use of slang here in America, Black English. And it's funny because I remember as a high school student here in America, after when I came back, I did come back to America to continue my secondary education. Teachers would always talk about, would always tell me, which I'll use me for example. Teachers would always tell me about how they loved the way I spoke. You speak so properly. And the kids would say, you speak so properly, because of course, the way I spoke was in alignment with the way I was being educated in Nigeria, which is a former British colony. So we had to enunciate and pronounce our words and speak a certain way. But not only that, the tribe that I'm from in Nigeria, as an Igbo, education and the way you present yourself intelligence-wise is such a big deal. So of course, there's no way in the world I could have avoided that being part of my overall presentation. So I remember teachers would, and then this did me no justice, it did me no good, but teachers always taught a class about how I would speak versus how they would speak. So mind you, we're talking about Los Angeles, in the city, we're talking about, this was Inglewood, California, in the South Bay of LA, and telling other kids that, look at how properly he speaks, and you guys this is how you're supposed to speak. And again, reinforcing this westernized concept of language and what proper language or proper English should be, and not recognizing that there has been a hybridization, a reformation of the English language to fit the needs of those people who spoke it. And the way it was always spoken is as though there was only one Black English that we need to stay away from. But as an adult and someone who's traveled across the country, Black slang, Black English is very different from region to region. In LA, you speak a certain way. In New York, you speak a totally different way. If you go to Memphis, if you go to Memphis, if you go to St. Louis, if you go to Atlanta, across the country, it's funny. I watch movies and I can tell you, that's LA right there, just from hearing a couple of words. When I hear I'm finna, finna, I'm just like, okay, that's for me, that's a way we used to say I'm going to. That was something that I heard in LA when I was in the Marine Corps in the South. I heard that in the South as well. And there's all these little interesting language uses and words that are really unique to certain parts of the country. And the fact of the matter, all that tells me is that not only is there things Black English, there are dialects of Black English. But the problem is when a child is raised within the safety and sanctity of their culture, they're now sent to school. And that school believes that the way they speak is incorrect. Not being recognized as an actual language, but incorrect. Then all of a sudden, here comes the beginning of establishing this belief that all of a sudden this child is not intelligent, or this child is miseducated, and we have to break them away from speaking like that. And that's such a dangerous thing, and something that's been impacting our community for way too long. And one thing I can tell you is I've actually been in spaces where I've heard teachers, based on a way a Black child speaks, or a Spanish Latino child speaks, pass judgment on their intelligence. And I was like, wow, watching this documentary, Subnormal, and I was like, wow, they're doing this. And another example was given along the lines of language and vocabulary. They were talking about how part of the IQ test that they had a list of words that would use to try and measure whether a child to help measure a child's intelligence. By really seeing the depth of their vocabulary. And one of the words on the list, and there was a black psychologist who was being interviewed, and was talking about her noticings during those times. A word like tap, T-A-P. So tap, of course, can mean to tap, to make a tapping sound. Tap also could be also a verb where you select someone, but tap can also be another word for faucet, or in Caribbean, pipe. So here you ask for tap water in America, and I'm assuming in the former UK in Britain, but in the Caribbean and even in Africa, it's pipe water, where the water comes from a pipe. So when you show a child the word tap, and you want them to identify that word, that item, that's a tap, and that's not the word that they use, and they're not familiar with that word, they would look at you like you have two heads, And she recognized this, and she talked about how if she was in a room where there was a faucet, she would point to the faucet and ask the child, "What is that called?" And the child said, "That's a pipe," which is in complete alignment with their understanding of the world from their community, from their space. Again, this is something that made me go back to my education. For those of you who have suffered SATs, here in America, the standard aptitude test that you take to use as a assessment, a standardized assessment for your ability and college readiness. When I took it, almost 30 years ago, actually 30 years ago, 30 years ago. Yeah, that was 1991. Wow. Oh, 1992, so 30 years ago. I remember I took it twice. The first time I took it, it was after a football game. I was exhausted. I fell asleep during the test. But for the little bit of time that I was conscious, I'm going to the test, and I remember I saw a word in a math problem. To this day, I don't remember what the math problem was about. I just remember it was a word problem. But in that question, there was the word cul-de-sac. And I don't know why that word just stuck in my brain, because I had never seen it before. I never heard it. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even pronounce it. I know now it's cul-de-sac, but then I had no idea, no clue. It was as foreign as bringing in a Martian in front of me. I couldn't tell what a Martian looks like, based on, apart from stereotypes. It was just a foreign thing to me. I saw that word and my brain got stuck on it. What is this word? What is this thing? I just remember sitting there and just being lost, So fast forward years. That's a word that I guess I just never came across again for whatever reason. And this was years. I'm talking about, by this time, I think I'm a first or second year teacher. So we're talking about years, at least 20, maybe 20, 50, I would say about 13, 14 years. I'm flying to Wichita, Kansas to go visit my family. My siblings by that time had settled in Wichita. I'm flying to go see them. And my sister tells me, from the airport, take a cab, and we are the house at the top of the cul-de-sac. And it was like a nightmare. I was like, that word again, cul-de-sac, my nemesis. And I just remember thinking to myself, okay. And it's funny, I could have asked her, what is the cul-de-sac? But I think my ego was like, no, hold up, you're the teacher. You can't be asking your sister, the nurse, what a cul-de-sac is. You just got to wait it out. So at least I knew I had the address. So if I was lost, I could look for the house number. We're driving from the airport, and it's about a 15-minute drive. And in my brain, that word cul-de-sac was echoing, cul-de-sac, cul-de-sac. I'm thinking, what am I going to see? Is this like a hill, a valley? Is there like a river? Like, what is this cul-de-sac thing? And it's funny because at that point in time, I had a iPhone, I think. I probably could have looked it up, but I just didn't. You know how we are. Sometimes we just get lazy. Rather than looking up the word, we just kind of like ride with it, right? We got to a street, we turned, and we're driving down the street. The street kind of like, you could tell it was like a dead end street, right? It's kind of a dead end street. You know, it kind of like, you get to the bottom of it, there was a couple of houses at the circle, and it kind of spit back out again. So we got there, and literally the house that was literally at the top of that circle coming in was my sister's house. And I was like, at the top of the cul-de-sac, wait a minute. Dead end street? A street with no outlet? Why don't you just say that? And then as it dawns on me, as I'm sure it's dawning on you right now, that exam, and when I took the SATs, and the word cul-de-sac, it's not a word that was used in my community where I grew up. If somebody lived on a dead end street, it was a dead end street. The signs say dead end street or dead end. It doesn't say cul-de-sac. Cul-de-sac is a French word. We're not in Canada. We're not in Quebec. We're not in Montreal. We're not even in Louisiana. We are in, I'm taking this test in Los Angeles. At least use a word that's in Spanish to represent cul-de-sac. But cul-de-sac is a French word. So again, it's not something I would be familiar with. But now see how that word had such an impact on me. So now think about all the stuff that a lot of our children struggle with and is used to as a mark of low intelligence or laziness or inability that has nothing to do with that. It has to do with cultural biases and how those cultural biases are, in a lot of cases, intentionally being used to marginalize a community of children. In this documentary, Subnormal, that's exactly what was happening. They were showing how, with documentation from the higher-ups in the educational system in Britain, how they knew what they were doing. And they were still trying to justify it by now saying, check this out, that Caribbean children were more likely to misbehave, or at least have behavioral issues. I'm an educator. And what population of children have had that label placed on them? Black and brown boys. And now, overwhelmingly, black and brown girls as well. So it's just interesting watching this documentary telling the story from the 60s and 70s, and then me coming to America in the 80s and having the same experiences in the early 80s, and now then me becoming an educator in the 2000s, and me being in the midst of seeing this be a thing still. And I have to say, there are those out there who are fighting to topple this notion and these biases around how we label children. And there's so much more in this documentary. I mean, please watch this. It's on Amazon Prime. And Subnormal, I think the film was made in 2021, is being like featured right now for Black History Month. But again, this film really made me like think even harder about what's happening in our spaces? What's happening? Just allowing this to continue and persist over time. There were solutions given, not solutions, but actions shown that families took, to kind of like reverse these things, and that's something that I'm not going to talk about right now. I want you to go ahead and watch the documentary and you see that, and maybe in a later episode, I can talk more about, civic engagement in education and why that is something that seems to be, limited within urban communities. Not to say it doesn't happen, but in most urban communities, there's very little civil engagement around education, and parents asking, "What is my child learning? Why are we learning this? And how do and what do we need to do to really support the growth of our children?" I'll be honest with you, this is something I never thought about before, but since becoming a parent and having a daughter and a son. And my daughter she's creeping towards that beginning of her formalized education years according to the way the system is established, pre-K and kindergarten. I am more and more, inquisitive and questioning, how the system works and how that can impact my daughter and my son as well. My son's going to be 3 in a few days, and I'm seeing all the growth that that they're going through, the language acquisition. My son able to make sense of adding things and subtracting things, and my daughter's starting to really push her use of vocabulary. All these things are very, very important to me, because schools have the ability to do one of two things: to really shoot children to the stars, or tie that little rope to their ankles to the stake in the ground, so that no matter how big they get and how strong they get, they can never break free from the self-doubt and those things that sometimes is subconsciously fed into them, or that they're unconsciously taken in, that says that they're not good enough. So yeah, I did say I didn't want this to be very long, and I feel like I'm pushing 30 minutes, and I'm going to stop here. So do me a favor. If you're coming across this podcast and you enjoy any of the things I'm saying, or you agree with, please share this. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. I am at Uche Njoku on YouTube, and this is a Sneaker Principal. And Sneaker Principal is my handle across all my social media accounts. I am an educator, and I am using this platform to share some of the ideas in my head, and these ideas are 100% mine. So I take all blame for anything that I stir up, or any thing that I say, because again, I love what I do. I love the work that I've done for the past number of years with young people and families, and majority of that time I was not a parent, and now I am a parent, and I do care deeply about what's happening and how these things impact my children. Because I've been through it in the educational system. I've been to the highest of highs, and I've been to the lowest of lows. With lows being told that I was retarded in the 3rd grade and I need special education services, and then the highest of highs, attending Columbia University to get my master's in educational leadership. Talk about climbing from darkness into light. But also in that light, guess what happens? You see more. You start to see the expanse of issues that is within the system, and you also see how it impacted you and how it continues to impact others. So I am a self-professed subverter, and I really want to do whatever I can do to really inspire you to think about your children and education. If you don't have any children, the education that you went through and the education that's being passed on through your community, to make sure that the right things are happening for our children and the right things are happening for our community. So again, with that being said, thank you so much for your time. Be well, and I'll see you guys soon again. All right, peace.
And now he's been promoted. His job, principal.